Okay, we're in session. Good morning. We'll go to the agenda. The first is the budget update. Good morning.
Good morning. Sorry. Courtney Desabay, Special Assistant to the Chief Financial Officer, speaking on behalf of Chief Financial Officer John Walker. Today's budget update, there are 3 items. So we begin with update on the FY19 budget process. So this slide shows the events in black that we had recently and the events in red that are currently underway. So as you may be aware, the school tools is currently live. We have budget collaboratives ongoing as I speak right now in room 301. So we're meeting with all the schools individually to go through their budgets. So the school and grants budget tools are currently live. The central office tool went live last week as well. Also on the milestone calendar, you see the community budget meeting, so I'm going to touch on that as one of the agenda items here. So I'm going to share some of the feedback that we received from the community meetings that we had last couple weeks. So the community budget engagement, this was focused around building school budgets. So this was sort of an explanatory presentation as to the steps in the school budget development. So we included a summary on how the Fair Student Funding model works, just in general. To be clear, this was not, continuing the debate on the new Fair Student Funding model. This was not about specific FY19 budgets or budget gaps or any of those things. This is just in general how school budgets are developed. So it was more, like I said, an informatory type of presentation. So the community is aware of the steps involved and what their role is in the development of their school budgets as well. So we focus on 9 stages of school budget development, and we also solicited their feedback on those various stages. I did not include it in this presentation, but we attached it, what the presentation was that we made to the community. So we spoke on the process beginning with enrollment projections, the process ending with enrollment adjustments, the various stages in between. Specifically, what we really dug in on were the community budget forums, which are the most crucial aspect of the Fair Student Funding formula. Fair Student Funding is predicated on the idea that schools and communities will be giving feedback on how their budgets are developed. The community budget forums are where the community gives their primary means of feedback from the community to the principal on how they develop their individual budgets. So we wanted to ensure that the community members were aware of their roles in those meetings, and also if they had any feedback or questions as to how those meetings were taking place or what they were seeing in their communities, that we're able to gather that feedback. So included on the next slide is a sample of some of the feedback that we received. So community members were asking for more guidance on the roles and bylaws of the various community groups, like the school family councils. Information, they said, needs to be visible and readily available, so they like the information prominent on our budget website. They prefer more lead time for engagements and more time for principals to notice the community of upcoming engagements. So that starts with us in central office, giving the principals enough lead time of when events are taking place so that they can also give the community enough lead time of when those events are taking place. They enjoyed or appreciated the interactions that we had, the budget forums that we had. They wanted more of those forums and more lead time to attend those forums. One of the other items that was requested, as we are currently arranged, we do the board budget presentation on one board meeting and then the board vote on a separate board meeting, usually giving 2 weeks in between. The community was suggesting that they prefer more time in between the presentation and the vote so that they have more chance to review the budget and give feedback on the budget before it's voted on. They would also like more attendance by central office staff at community events. So this stemmed from one of the questions we asked as to how do we best engage the community or get community involved in the events that central office is promoting. One of the feedback that we received was that it would help if central office attended more of the community meetings, attended the back to school nights. They were more present, or people were more present at some of those events. We currently do have the FCE department, which takes a role in some of those events, but it seemed like the feedback was just asking for a little bit more of that. They also asked for more opportunities to engage with the different central office departments, getting to know who's who in the different departments, who's responsible for what portion of work. They thought that would aid the community knowing who to reach out to when they had specific questions as well. And as always, a more detailed breakdown of central office spending. We explained that we present this every year at the budget. They wanted this, in a more readily available format, not just during the budget process, but at other points in the year.
Question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that there were questions about the roles of the different entities that exist within the schools, and I'm not sure if you're the person that can answer this, but again, I've asked this before, the role of the school family council versus PTA versus other parent and community groups. Do the school family councils have an official role in these meetings that the principals sponsor? And what is the difference or similarities between the role that the family councils have versus PTAs or other groups?
The school family council does have a specific role. Unfortunately, I'm not, the one to really to answer on that. I think FCE can give a little more detail on that, but they do participate in the community budget forums and sponsor the community budget forums. They also sign off on the community budget forums and the information the principals turn in for their budgets at the start of the budget development process as well. But we can get some more details from the FCE department as to the specific steps involved in that.
They should be, school family councils have changed a little bit over time, and I think they're not as robust as they were a few years ago, but they are the ones who are supposed to be convening the groups of people to review the budget, and they are the ones who should be signing off on the budget and responsible for that. So that's one of the jobs of family and community engagement, is to work with the schools to make sure that that is in place, and that if there's not a robust way that there's community engagement and that sign-off is not really happening, that we should be flagging that for the school community to make sure that those meetings are really happening and the sign-off is happening in a meaningful way.
Correct. All right. Any other questions on the community engagement meetings or the feedback that we received? Okay. The next item is the budget guidance. So the board expressed when we did the FSF model update that they'd like to see the budget guidance this year, the FY19 budget guidance. So we've included that for the board to review. And in this presentation, I've included some highlights. So the budget guidance, the purpose of it is to provide school leaders with a comprehensive support document. So when they're developing their budgets, they have a frame of reference for what they can or cannot do, what the parameters are for, the decisions that they're making within the budget. We also explained this as part of the community budget forums. We wanted to make sure we emphasize the point that school leaders were not creating budgets in isolation. They're doing so based on feedback from their community. They're doing so with input from central office staff from the various departments that are experts in their field. Some of the offices that are listed here are the ones providing guidance for the budget guidance. So you have the Budget Office, Human Capital, Grants, FCE, Academic, Special Education, Facilities, Transportation, IT, Communications, the ILEDs. And some of the topics covered are the budget process overview, transactional instructions like how to operate in K-12, how to do budget amendments, P-STARs, fund string details. What does the 3001.18.00, et cetera mean? So breaking that down, what the different steps mean. Updating their roster, how to do resignations, retirements, assignments, the timeline for those things, what their steps are in the process. Required positions, if there's guidance saying that you have to have, X amount of FTE for a position or what the reasoning is behind that. Restrictions for grants, community engagement, school performance plans, planning sessions, the COMAR requirements, guidance from CTE, guidance from special education, summer school extended learning, athletics, custodians, transportation, tech purchasing guidelines, tech for assessments, and there was information on school websites this year as well. So this is a sample of some of the items included. The document is like 91 or so pages long. It's pretty in-depth, and it's updated every year based on any changes in guidance.
Quick question for you, Courtney. Given
Sure.
the board's push and the union's collaboration on student engagement and student recruitment, within the budget topics, it's an indirectly related, but since students create the revenue for the school,
Right.
Have principals been given guidance on recruiting and retaining students?
To my knowledge, I don't think there's specific guidance on recruiting and retaining. I think there are offices that work with principals indirectly on that, but I don't think there's specific inclusion in the guidance for that. I think that's actually a pretty good suggestion. It might be something we look at for including next year, have a detailed, uniform, I guess, method of engagement that principals can refer to. While, I think in their individual communities, they may want to kind of tailor it based on what they know is going on, but giving them some support documents and guidance on that may be useful.
My guess is that, they've got plenty to do.
Yeah.
However, with the push for enrollment, knowing that that's the only way we immediately have impacts on budget on the income side,
Yeah.
it seems like an organic space.
No, I agree. I think there's some things even procedurally that can be included that just help retain students as even if not recruit further students. Yeah. Including presentation the links to those two documents like I mentioned. Any other questions?
I have some just general budget update questions.
Sure.
Since when I went to look at this, I was looking for, we're going to get a alignment on how on were we on our budget last in 2016-17? How many buckets of significant revenue have we had to shift? To sort of look at, as a board self-analysis, how effective were we in supporting a decision-making process in the budget? But not knowing the impacts and the actuality of budget from the prior year to help us inform our decisions this year.
Okay, so you're asking for a review of the prior budget.
Like a budget update.
Okay.
Like here's what our budget was, here's how it's changed, here's how these changes will inform decisions being made for 2017, 18, 18, 19. Yeah, year to date, thank you.
Okay.
Question on slide 7, which lists the things you just described that's part of the curriculum, I guess, for guidance. Who's actually providing this to the?
The information provided on the different sections come from the content owners. So, for example, the budget process overview, transactional instructions, that comes from the finance department. Updating roster, that'll come from human capital. So each office provides the information and details, the most up-to-date information on their section in the guidance.
Is this one-on-one, or this is a group? And this are the students, in this case, the principals? Who's receiving this information, and how are they getting it?
So this information is shared first with the ILEDs who coach the principals, but then directly with the principals when they receive their budget. So this is the document that they use in accordance with building their budgets. And what we do in the collaboratives is sort of go through in more detail and in person some of the same information that's presented in the guidance. So the guidance is the rule book, so to speak. In the collaboratives, we go through the actual class session where, as you mentioned, the principal would be the student. So they're the one who are getting sort of tutored as to what their role is and what the requirements are for the different offices. And we will have, like I said, representatives from the different offices. So there'll be someone from Title I, there'll be someone from special education, there'll be someone from human capital, there'll be someone from finance, there'll be someone from college and career readiness, someone from teaching and learning, to kind of go through and answer questions to make sure the principals have all the support that they need when they're making those decisions. And
Is
there'll be
that a class or one-on-one?
This is one-on-one. It's not a class. So the guidance they receive on their own, they consume on their own. The budget collaboratives are while they're constructing their budget, which is taking place right now with those different departments. But there isn't an instructional class on the guidance, no.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank
Good morning. John Land, Executive Director of Operations. This is our second transportation update of the year that we want to give to the Operations Committee. We'll go over our curb-to-curb ridership as of this year. We'll also look at a retrospective on our cost from fiscal 17 in the cost breakdown between different riderships. We'll also go over 3 initiatives, the Transportation Workgroup, there's a new bus contract in the works, and our GPS initiative, and then we'll go over some challenges and what we're doing, and talk about some of our competing pressures in transportation that, it's not easy issues to solve in transportation, and there are competing pressures. Just want to illuminate those, and then want to talk about route creation, how we, just an overview on how we create our routes in transportation. Whoops. No, I'm not sure if she's coming in.
She was here for the last one.
Yes. So our curb-to-curb ridership as of January 4th, 2018 shows that we have about 75 students more this year as of January 4th than we did last year. We have 16 more students with IEPs, 40 more students who are homeless, 74 more students that are siblings traveling together. But ESOL is lower, and we believe that's because more programs are in place. And with that increase in ridership, we also have a reduced bus capacity of 20 buses due to a driver shortage. So last year, we had 277 buses. This year, I'm sorry, we have 277 buses and 297 last year.
Quick question for you. I know that the gifted and talented is not a protected group the way that special education and ESOL are, but given we have limited gifted and talented programs, are we busing students to those as well? Or are we requiring parents to provide that transportation?
We're requiring parents.
Okay,
to
so
do that.
that's going to be an equity issue that we might need to look at around transportation.
Okay. Then this is another look at our per pupil cost over FY17. Tried to put a finer point on it to come up with our per pupil cost and also with a per bus cost. So our city schools curb-to-curb transportation, which is that transportation for students with disabilities, students who are homeless, ESOL students. We ran about 24 buses last school year, and that's about, as you can see, our per bus cost is about $127,000. Our contract curb-to-curb, which is the bulk of our budget, we had 272 buses, and that's about $91,000 a year, and that's comparable to other LEAs that have contracted buses, for instance, Baltimore County. We also have a contractor corner to corner, and those are the buses where the students gather at a bus stop, the bus arrives, and they board, and it's a lot of students that board a bus, so the buses are generally full. So we get a little more efficiency with that, and they have shorter runs. And then you can see our taxi cab cost. Yes.
City schools curb to curb, is that buses or is that taxi cabs?
That's buses. So
And so-
city schools would be our own fleet that, that are, the drivers and aides are employed by city schools, and the buses are being financed by city schools.
So the buses are owned by the district, and the employees that drive them are district employees, and
Yes.
these buses literally drop children off and pick them up at their place of residence?
Yes. Yes.
And then then the next category, contractor curb to curb, is that taxi cab?
The contractor curb to curb is the bus.
The bus.
Yes.
Where is the taxi cab in this?
So the taxi cab is the bottom, the last one. And
Taxi, where it says taxi cab?
Right.
Okay.
So that's, we transported about 1,400 students, and about the per pupil was 5,963.
So can you distinguish for us between the students that use the city schools curb to curb versus the contractor curb to curb, and then finally those that use the taxi cab?
Okay. As far as the students go, there are no distinctions between city schools and the contractor. If there is one distinction, all our buses are from city schools are wheelchair buses. It doesn't mean we transport students solely with, who are in wheelchairs, but our fleet is designed to accommodate wheelchairs.
And given the difference in cost between contractor curb to curb and city schools curb to curb, what is the basis for keeping the city schools curb to curb service versus privatized or contracting for those?
It gives us flexibility as far as providing service. For instance, we'll use our city school buses to, for extra coverage if we can. For instance, with the move to Calverton, we use some of our buses as what we call sweeper buses to go through and find students who may have missed the first bus to school. It gives us the flexibility to do test runs with those buses and not employ a contractor for it. It gives us flexibility, again, to we use a lot of our drivers. We also have driver twos, which are full-time employees who, if a contractor turns in a route on a given day, we'll take our driver, put him in one of our buses, and go plug the hole.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you done any sort of geographic analysis? Most of the curb to curb are going to be going to special day settings and pieces like that, to see, as we're doing 21st century, if there's an overlay of positioning programs in more strategic locations around the city to minimize bus times. And I know students move and things like that, but if there's some general trends, is that a cost-saving thought?
Transportation is present in the portfolio review meetings, so if there's any moves that take place, we sort of evaluate those from a transportation perspective. Is it going to add buses? Is it going to reduce buses? Do we think students will travel further?
I ask because, as we look at these, many of them are fixed costs, whether it's McKinley-Vento or the need to transport students with special needs. Do you see spaces, if you were able to say, ooh, we could really cut money here or there? Do you have those?
I think one of the big areas would be to have the portfolio more balanced across the geographic region. Like if you take the city and divide it into 4 quarters, to sort of keep programs, and there's cost on that side of it as far as personnel and materials, but to have programs that are for that one quadrant, and students who live in a quadrant will be transported there. So that would reduce the distance our buses are driving and the time.
But as you said, I mean, there's challenges with that too, in terms of, the capacity to actually provide that programming around the city. So I think you may know that we have a work group that part of our financial recovery plan was to look at transportation and how to bring the cost down. So, and we said we would convene a work group to help advise on that. So we've got folks from Burke and from the state, from other LEAs, legislators, kind of all helping to go through our transportation approach currently to help us think through ways to cost save.
Well, just a question of work. I think the next slide, so 5, I'm going to go to that.
Okay.
I was curious whether there was any, this is up and running, and I wonder whether there's any value in bringing in some private sector providing the transportation deal or other for profit.
We have relations with we could look into that. I considered it in forming this group, but the people I know we have contracts with, so I wasn't comfortable with that, the arm's length distance, because
For example,
Like Viola, we have a contract with. A lot of the private entities who you might want to consult with are ones who we have existing contracts with, so it's kind of hard to have them in a work group capacity advising us on cost-saving measures.
So First Student, for example, is one of our providers for curb-to-curb transportation. And they have a lot of experience, a lot of technology, and they have some people that we know that, we deal with who are they're experienced experts. One is a former director in Anne Arundel County Transportation, so they understand Maryland and students with special needs and transporting them. But they also they spearhead their contract and their negotiations with us over the contract.
and does this group have a deadline by which it has to submit a report?
We're targeting, I believe it's late July, early August for a report. So this group, as you can see, we have I feel like a pretty good representation of some experts and people who use our system as far as students go and their families. We have the Special Education Citizens Advisory Committee present, and that's a parent who has a child with disabilities who uses transportation as well. We have the Public Justice Center, who has a special interest in homeless students and students who are in foster care. We have some school principals there. We also have some active and former directors of student transportation from other Maryland jurisdictions. We have the state director of transportation, a former state director of transportation.
Well, the only thing I would suggest is this is almost entirely nonprofit or government,
Okay.
and there is value to having a for-profit entity having some level of review, and maybe not as part of an official work group, but maybe as a scope item of this work group, there is a way to engage, whether it's the taxi cab industry, if there isn't some entity that speaks for the taxi cab industry, or whether it's Veolia or some other, a private university, for example, as opposed to a public university that has a large transportation system and set of requirements. It seems to me I understand the conflict issue, and I'm wondering if that can be managed, like conflicts can often be, through some alternative parallel process that at least gets some input from the private sector on how to, on potential efficiencies or economies of scale or other improvements that we could bring to the system.
We'll look into that. I think
Okay.
if we can possibly, manage at arm's length, I think we have some good experts.
We also did talk about, and I could follow up with, we talked about an individual who works for a private consultant firm and whether or not he would want to join, so I'll try to reach out to him to see if he'd be interested. We don't contract with that particular firm.
Any efforts to include students?
We have a family member who has students. But
We have a number of youth organizations that I think, because transportation is such a social justice issue, that I think some of our social justice leaning student organizations might be interested in membership, but also the Student Senate.
Okay, thank you. Then there's a new bus contract in the works. We haven't received a bid yet, but it has been put out to bid. Our intention was to, as part of this work group, to review the contract, to come with new ideas on the contract. And so we wanted to postpone going out with a request for proposal by a year so we can adjust the contract. However, one of our bus contractors said they may have to, there's a risk of losing 40 buses if we don't go out with a new contract so to mitigate that risk, we went out with a new contract. So it's possible that there's a pretty good chance that our bus costs will go up for fiscal 18.
Can you explain for me what that means? You said you'll lose 40 buses if you don't do a new contract?
So the bus contract that exists now has been in place for 5 years. And we have, because of our financial situation as a district, we have not increased the cost to the bus contractors. So there's a increase that's to our discretion whether we impose or add or not every year, 2.5%. We have not done that over 5 years. So some of these, this one contractor, it's just not good. They're just not making the money that they wanted to because we've held back our costs. Their costs have increased, but we have held the cost increase down. So it's not as sustainable, and they need to, and they have commitments to landlords that, for instance, if this one organization is renegotiating with their landlord, so the landlord wants a firmer commitment, so there's some complicating factors, but mainly it's not sustainable for this one company.
Thank you.
You're welcome. This is our, just to give you an update on our GPS. The board approved that. Our buses all have GPS now. We can go on and see where our buses are. There's some still work to be done to make this fully operational. Our target is the summer of 2018. The big piece that to make it operational is the student data and the route data that's in our routing system to integrate with the GPS system. So that data integration takes some work and some time to test and put in place. But I'm glad to say we have GPS on our buses now. Our target is summer of this summer. We'd like to test pilot everything in with summer school.
Primary benefits of having GPS on every vehicle?
Well, one thing, is that we'll be able to monitor our bus contractors. We'll be able to monitor them when they send us an invoice. Is this really how the bus ran? We'll be able to also monitor their on-time performance, their arrival to the school. And that's why that route data from our system is important to have in there, because that way the bell schedules are in there, the students will, their pickup times are in there, so we can, compare the bus run to what our route plan is and look for the variance between the plan.
And you currently have staff that can do that monitoring, or is this a newly created position?
We currently have not, we have staff who can monitor it, but it's part of their ongoing duties. It'll be added to them. So it's not, we would like to have staff that can do this, monitor it on a regular basis. But that's something we have to put into our budget. But we do have a data analyst in transportation who's pretty adept at analyzing data, and he's used this system in a previous jurisdiction.
Thank you.
So some challenges that we have in transportation we wanted to inform you about what we're doing. One is the location. Again, we talked about it a little earlier. So where the students live and where the programs are, where their needs are, there's some lengthy travel times and distances, and that drives the cost of our buses. Late bus arrivals, that's a problem, a challenge we have as well, that program location complicates it as far as the drive time, going through a lot of traffic and construction in the city. So that location has increased our taxi dependency. That's one of the factors because some students can't ride on a bus that long. So the shorter is a more direct route, which a taxi cab can provide. We're doing some actions. We've worked with offices. Like I said, we're in the portfolio review meetings. We always try to get a transportation perspective on locations. We do work with the offices on, where the students live. If there's a route, it's a tough one to put a student on. We do contact the offices who can in turn contact the family and try to give some other alternatives as far as program location. Another big challenge for us, and it's an industry challenge that is nationwide, is a driver shortage and driver turnover. This is something that, our contracts, the bus companies, the vendors who we have contracts with have this challenge. We have this challenge. And so it really plays out that when a driver calls in and says, I can't make it in, the contractors and us, we really don't have a big bench to go to fill that driver's seat. So we pull from different places as far as, people who are, so we'll pull people from our dispatch to drive a bus, or the contractor will pull someone who can drive a bus, but they are picking up phones and doing the dispatch at the vendor. So now they're on the street driving the bus, and so that customer service part of the business suffers because there's no one there to answer the phone. Some of the things we've done to reduce, to try to recruit drivers is we've attended job fairs, we advertise vacancies, and we've hosted an operations job fair in the past. It's not a home run, any of these things. It's sort of on the edges as far as filling driver vacancies. You know, the big challenge we have with driver, I think one of the things is the pay and the work hours. You know, it's a transportation where we basically work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. The drivers will do a shift in the morning from generally, 6 to 10-ish, and then in the afternoon from 2 to 6. So it's a split shift. It's a tough position to fill and make attractive. Ridership, our ridership has grown every year, and that ridership also increases the travel time and the distance of the buses, which in turn increase our cost. Again, we're working with offices on students' eligibility. We've ensured appropriate services to meet student needs, and we've increased efficiency by using corner-to-corner buses for some student groups. So, we do it for we've increased our corner-to-corner for ESOL students, and then in turn with the added programs for ESOL, we're able to take. I think we've really put a decrease in the ESOL students on the curb-to-curb transportation, which is more expensive. Some other challenges we have, it's the managing the contract, validating invoices. That's a really big challenge for us. So, if we have 300 contractor buses running every day, that's every month, that's 300 times 20 lines of invoicing that we have to review. It's very difficult. Managing the service delivery by the contractors is a challenge. We hope that GPS will help us with that, and that's our anticipation, that the GPS will help us manage our contractor performance. Safety is a challenge that we've addressed. We have an accident driver review certification process. So anytime there's an accident in a driver, we review that driver's entire prior history to determine, did this accident change their certification status. We've suspended drivers and until a determination has been made. We have staff dedicated now to monitoring the Maryland Vehicle Administration notifications and the criminal justice notifications. We have monthly, we have a accident review committee where it has drivers meet together and go over every accident from the previous month and to find lessons learned from it, to make determinations on that was the driver at fault or not at fault. Another challenge for us is information flow, and that has a lot to do with the way we're, our business model being contracted out. So you have a parent that makes a request to the school in turn makes a request to an office or directly to transportation. We in turn go to the contractor to implement a change, and the contractor in turn to go to a driver. So there's a lot of moving parts, and sometimes the requests have to be acted on pretty quickly, and so that we're moving ahead before all the information is there. Sometimes information changes, so that's a challenge we recognize. We have staff assigned to schools to communicate and resolve issues, and we are trying to get more reports electronically so we can get that information quicker with less cumbersome process. There's some competing pressures in transportation, and this slide the intent is to just sort of give a high level of what they are. We get a lot of, we want to decrease our student ride times. We want to decrease the students on taxi cab. We want to increase the average number of students on the bus, per bus, and we want to decrease cost. But each of these sort of have a competing pressure. So if we want to decrease student ride times, we have to increase our bus cost, increase taxi cab, which is increase our budget. And that has a lot to do with the distance and using the buses more within the fleet that we have. Decrease the students on taxi cab. We can drive taxi cab costs down by putting more students on bus, but that bus will ride longer and racking up miles and distance, and that will add cost and add pressure to our budget. Our our increase the average number of students per bus. We can do that and decrease taxi cab. However, again, just like the previous line, our budget will go up, our time and distance goes up because students are riding longer. So those are some of the competing pressures that we encounter. And it's not this is a high level, there's other factors that complicate things, but these are some of the big ones. And I wanted to go over sort of what we do to build a route, and this is what gets into that student ride time and distance, what drives our cost. This is an example of two schools. So at the start of every school year, we get, or during the summer, schools will submit transportation requests for students with special needs, students who are homeless, and we get that data in, and then we have to build the routes from them. So these are two schools, Furley Elementary, which is 36 students for transportation, and George McMecken, which is 58 students for transportation. And you can see where these students are distributed across the county. Across the city. The one student in the county is most likely a homeless student who is in a shelter. Then to take those, all those students, this is one route for some of those students. This is one bus that's servicing both schools. So you can see that the bus starts for Furley Elementary on the west side and works its way eastward to Furley Elementary, and then it drops the students off there, and then starts picking up students on the east side and travels back west to McMecken. So that's sort of a path that a lot of our buses travel due to the dispersion of students across the city. And this is that bus run. This is a breakdown of some of the factors that go into the time and the distance. One is, it's an industry term, it's called deadhead time. That's when the bus is traveling from its yard to its first pickup or back from its last drop back to the yard. There's the student pickup time, so we have to allocate time to pick students up for them to board the bus. There's also the travel time, from the first stop to the next stop, and then there's the drop-off at the school. So the morning run up top shows the two schools, and you can see that one of the, make sure I can, the times. The first pickup for Furley is at 6:23 a.m. That's one student, and the next one's at 6:33, and it travels to drop the students off at 7:40 a.m. in the morning. So if we wanted to add, if Furley Elementary got another student that was within the vicinity of these students that we could pick up, we could add them to that bus, but one of these, the likelihood is that student at 6:23 and 6:33 a.m. is going to be picked up earlier. They're going to be more pushed towards 6 a.m. They will ride longer. Then we add the student on, and with that student comes additional miles and times. So if they get another student and this is a tight route that we can't fit another student on, there's a good chance that student will go to a taxi cab. And then they they drop off and they start picking up the students at McMecken. So you can see they drop off at 7:40. I believe that Furley's bell time is at 7:45. And now they have to get back to, the bus has to pick students up and get back to the west side for an 8:55 drop for a 9 o'clock bell schedule for McMecken. So there's not a lot of time between Furley and picking the schools up and going to McMecken. So that's, I think this shows that I think our buses are, you can see why we have 10 to 12 students on average per bus, and then we have students on taxi cab. And that's it, if there are any questions.
So the vast majority of students that need transportation aren't going to change, whether they're homeless or whether they have students with special needs. But there's nothing in this presentation around walking. And if we look at cost reduction, granted, it's not going to hit most of our students because most of our students who are typically developing and capable of walking may already be. We don't know. I think that would be a good place. Either this becomes the busing update, or if it's a transportation update, to include that in as a space to save money. Figure out, is it about safe routes? Is it about working with the city to work on sidewalks and neighborhoods, or just as another way of looking at the whole picture of transportation?
That's a good point, because transportation isn't just buses and taxi cab. There's parents, there's the MTA, there's lots of walkers.
So are also, to that point, are schools set up in a way where a student could ride their bike to school and have it secure all day? So I think that that's also another, when you look at all the modes of transportation.
There are some schools that do that. I'm not sure the level, that it is in the district. I know one school, Charles Barrister, I'm sorry, Charles Carroll, where you go in the school and you walk around and there's just all these bikes in the hallway lined up. They're organized. They're, in racks and stuff. It's pretty neat. I mean, it's a lot of little bicycles.
I just want to say how much I appreciate the fact that this presentation was very transparent about the challenges that you have. I mean, oftentimes, I think people want to present how well we're doing with the limited resources that we have, but you made it very clear we're doing everything we can within the limited resources we have, but we really can't do much more. And the trade-offs really can be resolved by more money. And so when we talk about a system that's underfunded, it affects students, it affects teachers, it also affects transportation and the experience that the student has getting from home to school. I mean, I would imagine, maybe you can ask this question, what is the experience of Baltimore City school students in terms of the time they need to get up and the amount of time they're on the bus and arriving at the school versus schools that are better resourced,
Yeah, it's a big difference. I mean, we are under a lot of pressure from the state to decrease ride times. Of course, we want to reduce student ride times. But you go into other jurisdictions. We've been to Baltimore County and Montgomery County, and the way that's just the feeder system of the schools' locations are structured and the bell schedules is they can more efficiently pick a student up and get them to school and they still have challenges of ride times. Those jurisdictions still have challenges, but it's probably less an exception than a rule. And one of the big differences in looking at those counties is that management piece, that administrative piece that we don't have here to put eyes on it. For instance, in Montgomery County, now this is it's a very well-funded, established program, but they have a supervisor for every 25 drivers. So in that driver, if a driver's absent in that supervisor's cohort, that supervisor can hop on the bus and drive that route. So that's
by comparison, we have what? Supervisors?
We have one supervisor.
Okay.
The contractors have their supervisors, but that's something that we can't control, but we can't as easily control as if it was our own. And we can't put the boots on the ground and the eyes on the schools. These Baltimore County and Montgomery County have the same challenges we do with GPS. They have the advantage of having a lot more feet on the ground, eyes on the schools, so there's a lot that doesn't get by them because they have that administrative piece. They're not necessarily trying to solve it with a technological answer. And for instance, in Baltimore County, they have a plan to add 41 new staff members to transportation. It's all administrative. It's all management. It's no drivers, no bus aides. So it's a business that takes a lot of hands-on and eyes on the field.
Thank you.
Last piece from me. The composition of this committee has changed, and we haven't had a chance to talk offline. But one of the things that the prior committee has always asked is in significant procurement opportunities, such as transportation with contractors, to work with an academic lens. You know, what can they offer to, say, a CTE program in transportation that would, you know, could include design and engineering and mechanics, possible workforce development for our students to be drivers to help fill this need. I would just, on behalf of the prior committee, and until we ordain this committee to do this as well, ask you to think about ways in the RFP process when you're working with people
Okay.
to get them to, okay, we're going to give you this X million dollars. What are you going to help back to help with internships or mentorships or job opportunities for our students?
Okay. I'll talk to procurement because I believe they're, you know, working on an initiative to make that an across district. I do not believe that's included in this current RFP that we're doing. Okay.
Before we go to the next item, just a quick housekeeping. I just want to make sure everyone knows that Michelle Bondima is the chair of this committee. She, I think, has a conflict today. She may be down in Annapolis, asked me to chair the committee. And we have today, for the first time, our new committee member,
She has a name.
yeah, Jeanette Richardson, sorry. And so this is her first, so treat her kindly, and I know she will do the same to everyone here. So, do you want to say anything about that?
I don't.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
All right. .03 feasibility study, Hartford Heights, Sharp Leadenhall Elementary School. Good morning.
My name is Sherry Vincent. I'm the interim executive director for the 21st Century School Buildings Program. And to my right is Maureen Gershberg,
Good morning.
facilities designer, who is going to assist in the presentation this morning for the Hartford Heights Elementary School, as you said, which contemplates which is a renovation addition project.
Could you move the mic closer and/or speak up just a little bit more?
And contemplates, I'm sorry, and contemplates a co-location with Sharp Leadenhall. Apologize. Maureen?
Good morning. Just to familiar you guys with the site, the school sits on North Avenue, but it's set back a little bit. So the street you see at the bottom, that's North Avenue. And then that's Broadway curving to the left on the left side of it. There's a parking lot where Broadway meets North Ave, and that's occupied by social services right now. The existing building is the two lighter orange cream colored pieces, and there's a piece that currently connects them. And then the darker orange is what we're proposing the new building will be. The upper cream colored one that's shaded in, that is the William C. March building. And so we're intending that the Hartford Heights kids occupy that during their swing space. And then once they move back into their renovated additioned building, that building is going to be surplused and demoed. So just keep that in mind. That's some of the constraints that we're working with. Additionally, there is a 2014 Weinberg Media Center in the existing Hartford Heights building. It's kind of right near the main entrance. If you're kind of standing in that parking lot and you just kind of walk straight up, it's right near there. And so that's something that we're trying to preserve as part of this project.
Do you want to stand next to you?
Because they're looking at it on their computers.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
they're seeing it on the computer. Okay.
Next slide, please. Okay, so as we said, this is going to be a co-location between the Sharp Leadenhall Separate Public Day School and the Hartford Heights program. Hartford Heights currently has a Pride program, and so one of the reasons for this co-location is so that there's a full continuum of services for kids who might either need to step up in services or step down. So you might go from Hartford Heights General Ed to Pride to Sharp Leadenhall, should you need to. So again, just having all those services on one site's good. Looking at the plan, the dark outlined area with the black dotted outline, that's intended to be the Sharp Leadenhall portion of the building, and then the remainder of that is going to be the Hartford Heights portion of the building. The Hartford Heights is retaining most of what's currently there, and we're just kind of doing a gut job and renovation job with that. And then the upper left-hand portion, and then some of that central portion, that's going to be new building. On the ground floor, when you first come in, where you see that red arrow, you have your admin, and then that blue block to the right, that's that Weinberg Media Center that I mentioned that we're going to be maintaining. We're not going to be touching that because that's practically brand new. And then on this floor, you have, I have it right in front of me. Okay, so this is the ground floor where you come in. One thing I didn't mention is there's a huge grade change on this site. So while you come in on grade where that red arrow is, this is actually this is an upper floor to your right. The younger kids are going to be a level down because they'll be on grade when you head out to the fields to the right. So on this floor, we have our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, as well as the Pride program, and some of the spaces that all grades are going to be using, the tech lab and the science lab. To the left of the main entry, in that blue area, you're going to see dining, because some of the services and the kitchen are going to be shared between Sharp Leadenhall and Harford Heights. So we have to, that's a huge consideration when you have a co-location, is how can they share those services, obviously without duplicating kitchens and service areas. And then if you continue, again, up to the left, that's going to be your Sharp Leadenhall area. The red arrow that's coming in from the left, that's going to be the main Sharp Leadenhall entry. I think almost 100% of their kids come in from yellow buses, and so obviously drop-off is going to be a consideration here on this site, and is definitely something that the architects have been will be instructed to look at, since there were several flags raised during the feasibility study about that, and the circulation on the site as well. Any questions about this floor plan? Okay. Let's go to the next floor. So this is actually the level down that I mentioned. So we have our younger kids on this level, the pre-K through 2nd graders, because if you just kind of go out to the right, that's on grade, and you have your playground and your fields out that way. And we like to put our little kids on the main level for egress reasons. There's also a Judy Center at this location and a Head Start. And it should be mentioned, there's currently one Head Start classroom in the main building now, and then there's also a modular with several Head Start classrooms in a modular kind of off to the lower right-hand corner of the site. When we were looking at options for this school, we looked at incorporating all of those Head Start classrooms. I think it was like 7 or 8 classrooms total for Head Start, so it was pretty much a full-blown ELC. So when we got the estimates in, we shared that with our Head Start partners, seeing if they would be willing to chip in, since it would have added an extra floor to the building, and they weren't willing to chip in. And so instead of doing the full-blown ELC, the plan we're proposing is just including the existing Head Start that's already in the building. And we'll be leaving the modular that's off to the right side of the site intact, so they will not be affected by this. And then also on this level, you have the gym in the light blue. Any questions about this floor? Okay. Here we have some potential elevations, but this is, if you look to the right on that top elevation, that's the existing building, so that will likely look very similar. We're going to spruce it up a bit. I don't know if we looked at, but they'll look at putting in more windows as an option, but I don't know that they actually will be able to do that, so likely it will look very, very similar, that right half. The left side, that's going to be the brand-new addition portion, and so that is subject to change when we actually get into design. And you can see here, obviously, that huge grade drop, and that lower level, again, it's going to be those younger kids, and that upper level, which is eventually on grade, that's your 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. Next slide. Again, just another section view or elevation, but you can see again that huge grade drop that happens on site. Okay, and so this is a view looking northeast. There's that parking lot, and just kind of to the lower right hand of that parking lot, that's going to be North Avenue. On the left side, you can kind of, where that green strip is, that's where the Sharp Leadenhall drop-off is going to be. We're maintaining kind of where the existing main entrance is for Harford Heights, when you're sitting in that parking lot and looking up straight towards the building. And again, you see that existing chunk of the building, that's going to look relatively the same, but then the other parts of it are going to be new. And then that gray mass in the back, that is William C. March. Again, we're going to use it for swing, but it's going to be demoed once they're done with swing. And that's been part of a conversation with the city.
And just to be clear, during construction, Hartford Heights, the program itself will swing into William C. March. Sharp Leadenhall would not come to the site until the building is completed.
Correct.
And just so you know that unfortunately, a portion of the existing Hartford Heights building does in fact provide the kitchen and the boiler for the William C. March building. So what we've worked out is the ability to construct the entire Sharp Leadenhall wing and renovate the existing wing of Hartford Heights and add the new construction between the two, while still maintaining William C. March. So we'll keep that portion, the northern portion of that one wing of Hartford Heights viable during the swing in order to keep William C. March operable. And then once the swing is no longer needed, then we'll go ahead and take that remaining small section of the building out. And then it will complete the project at that point.
I have a few questions. Did you want to start? Go
Well,
ahead.
I wanted to know, I have two questions. Have you shared this with the community? And what have been those reflections from that? And then will there be factored in opportunities for these two schools to be able to do some kind of coming together before they're joined?
We typically do a lot of joint work once the design process, actually once they're probably under construction. They do a lot more activities then about team building,
Sure.
Obviously because kids matriculate out. There have been community meetings. I don't know actually if, Nicole Price can answer those questions. Did you hear? We definitely did some Hartford Heights community meetings. I cannot remember. We should have. It was on the plan to do Sharp Leadenhall. I'm not quite sure
So
if we did. For
during the feasibility study, we actually did go to Sharp Leadenhall.
Okay.
If you recall, they had some concerns about how their portion of the building would be constructed. They had, they wanted to make sure that we understand how their program operated. So we actually did visit them in their current space. During the feasibility study, we go out to the community typically at 50% and then at 95% of the project development. And then once an option is selected, in this case, the renovation addition option, the community is aware of that. It then goes through the approval process with all the appropriate boards. And then once it goes into final design, then again, the community involvement starts up again. And during final design, community is invited in, I think, at least 4 times. And at that point, when there's a co-location contemplated, there's a very robust program for bringing together the two communities so that they understand each other a little better, have an opportunity to know how each program operates, and then so that there's no discomfort or surprises when the actual school year begins. So.
And then also, one more thing I wanted to add, so the principal who's there currently, this is her first year, and she's part of, I think, a principal guidance program, along with, they received extra SIG funding this year, so along with James McHenry and Mary E. Rodman, another 21st Century School. So they're receiving additional support this year. So that's also been, the amount of participation kind of varied throughout the feasibility study, but we anticipate that, again, picking up more with the new leadership and with when we kick off in design.
I have a couple questions. I forget, or remind us, the architect that does the feasibility study, is that a different architect that does the design?
It's not a guarantee. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different.
And Martha whispered in my ear that the building that is the swing space would ultimately be torn down, is that right?
Demoed, yes.
And what would be the use of that space?
It become green space, play area. It's very difficult to access that building, and then also because the utilities were hooked up, we looked at, like we talked, again, discussed with the city about what options for it, and they really did not want it because the current access to it, it's hidden, it's not straightforward at all, and even then it kind of crosses over this awkward bridge, which is it's very narrow. It's not an actually ideal location for
And-
anything.
Maybe the most uninformed question for me. Can you explain why Sharp Leadenhall, which is located near the stadiums, and Hartford Heights, which is located Broadway and North, are at this, now the same location,
Sure.
far from Sharp Leadenhall?
So Sharp Leadenhall is a program for K-5 kids with emotional disabilities.
Okay.
So it serves this entire
it's
city.
not-
Citywide,
Thank you.
Yeah.
yes.
And they have that, Hartford Heights does have that Pride program.
Uh-huh.
And so this is allowing us to surplus William C. March, surplus Sharp Leadenhall, have the combined campus with the full continuum of services. So it's really advantageous just overall.
And then my last question, I guess, revolves around, we don't hear a lot about Inspire in terms of the ability for these schools to be at the center of some sort of larger neighborhood planning and implementation. And this slide doesn't show it, but the one before shows the proximity of this building to the Gompers building, which is the corner of Broadway and North, which has been vacant and blighted and deteriorated and falling apart for as long as I can remember, which is right across street from this brand-new school.
Yep.
And then not to mention the space that is being created by the demolition of the building, whether that has some reuse potential, I don't know, but this building strikes me as a great opportunity to use it as an anchor within the community and plan closely with the city, identify opportunities around the building, do demolition where necessary, do renovation where necessary, and potentially other entities that might want to be next to or close to a brand-new school, including housing. So at what stage is this design shared with or somehow integrated with the Inspire process? I really don't know much about it and how it works, and
So during the course of the feasibility study, we, at 50%, we also go and chat with the IAC, and we also go to the Department of Planning. So the Department of Planning is very aware of the development of the feasibility study. And in this case, we plan to go back and sit with the Department of Transportation, simply because we have the opportunity to do it now, and it will factor into how it's viewed in final design to talk further about access to the site, and so egress and one of the problems have been, and I think Maureen alluded to it, is having the drop-off points for both programs and then exiting the site. There is a smaller road called Holy Cross at the top that exits from the north and then heads west out toward North Avenue, and it's a very narrow road. It's not in great shape at this point. There's not good traffic control at the end of it, and so sitting with DOT to talk about what the city has in terms of plans, running in front of them at this point for the surrounding area. Inspire looks at, of course, a half mile, or is it quarter mile, excuse me, around the entire school, and looks again at walking safety and traffic signage and access, for the children entering the site. So they'll be involved in that conversation with DOT as well. So it's an ongoing process.
this one, and being fairly ignorant about the process that you just described, seems fairly limited in terms of the potential for locating a brand-new school in a community that is undergoing some revitalization. There's Forest Hopkins down to the south, there's EBDI, there's entirely new plan for Broadway East, which goes all the way up to North Avenue. There's the PUD across the street, there's, as I mentioned, the Gompers building, and it just seems like if we wanted to try to pick one site, and I don't know them all, where there is a great potential for the housing department, the transportation department, the planning department, the mayor's office, and others to think about how this school could serve as a catalyst for redevelopment of this community, this might be a good example for it. I don't know whether that's beyond the scope of Inspire or not, but it's something I would encourage, and I'm going to continue to encourage, because the investment making these schools have all kinds of collateral benefits that we may or may not be thinking of, particularly when we engage other particular city agencies that have responsibility for some of the things we just talked about.
We will definitely keep that in mind, and certainly the Department of Planning has voiced, those exact sentiments, so we appreciate that.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation, and welcome to your role.
Thank you.
Having not had the benefit of prior conversations, someone possibly shared with you where I might come out on this one. And I struggle with this because we have to come in under budget and under time and make the best facilities possible with the best academics for students. Which is why when the Patterson-Claremont came up for feasibility, we had a lot of discussion around it, but ultimately I ended up voting with my team to move it forward. But now we're coming back to another co-location proposal. And I'm struggled to find any research that says where co-location is a benefit to students, where having a separate administration and separate paraprofessional staff and separate resource staff is a cost savings at a time where we need to be saving costs. And there is nothing about IDEA or separate day school legal platforms that says they have to have a separate name. And so if we're building a school and a school community, we have a history of understanding that separate but equal is not equal. We have an understanding of individuals with disabilities being historically underserved learners, and especially around a population where the students from physical appearance will appear to be typically developing. So what we're saying by putting kids in a different uniform, in a different school mascot, with a different school name and a different slogan is that you are different than me. When it is emotional and a behavioral disability, I'm especially challenged by that. So I will be not voting for this feasibility study, and I'll be encouraging my colleagues not to as well, because I think we have a chance to do this really well and do this right. And it's about one school in one building that serves all the students there, whether it needs a director of special education. Certainly they would need, the physical education teacher would need to be an adapted physical education teacher. The music teacher may need some additional training in music therapy. But if we continue to look at this as two schools, those kids and our kids, we're not going to be serving the needs of our students. So.
I absolutely.
Good without. I don't need to put you on the spot. You're
Right.
brand new in this role. I just don't know if we let the Claremont Patterson feasibility go through, but then we get too far down the road, we can't stop and change it then. Now it feels like we could do a better job in serving all of our students and do it right from the start.
And we've had several co-location situations, throughout the feasibility studies that I've been involved with. So, it oftentimes comes down to an academics question, and the specific programs that are needed.
Yeah, I have no problem with
Yeah.
multiple programs in a building, but especially as we're trying to build engagement and build enfranchisement with schools and build a brand around our schools, fracturing that brand within a building seems to me to be adding negative challenges.
So I think we need to have academics at a future conversation about this. I think, as we said before with Claremont too, there are some of these programs are going to remain separate schools, and there's reasons why we have separate public day schools. There are certain students who their IEP requires them to have a separate program, and with the efficacy of our separate schools tends to be as good as, if not better than, and in most cases better than some of the non-public placements. And so this is a way to engage students in an effective learning environment that falls short of having to put a student in a non-public placement, which is much more expensive, and the efficacy of that is questionable. And so if we're going to remain having those programs, and I think that we are, as much as possible, we should be providing opportunities to students that is not where they're ending up as a part of their IEP, that as much as possible we should incorporating students into the regular day program. But there will be some students for whom this is the appropriate placement. And when it's the appropriate placement, I think the feeling is that having a co-location and having opportunities for students to have a shared campus where they're having shared opportunities, it makes much more sense than having separate schools like we do now, like Claremont, Sharp Leadenhall, Lois T. Murray. All these schools are separate around the system, and they don't have the opportunity to engage with the traditional schools. So I think our feeling is that we are going to continue to have separate schools, and having separate schools, but having the opportunity for them to co-locate and share opportunities and be incorporated with those schools as much as possible is a much better option, and also provides the new facilities. And many of our separate schools, also their facilities are not in good shape. They are in really poor shape, and they're also very small. So it's hard to it would be hard to use 21st century resources to justify the use, to use them to create separate buildings for these schools when we think that these schools should, as much as possible, be incorporated with other traditional schools. And then we can have the benefit of building one school campus that allows opportunities for students to work together and for schools to work together while maintaining that separate status, but in a new facility. So I think those are the reasons why we did it that way. It was an equity concern. It was making sure that we were providing options for these schools and these students in our newly renovated buildings, not creating them separately. So I think that's the reason why they have to be separate as per as per their rationale for their IEP. They have to be separate schools. They can't have the same principal.
IDEA actually says they can, the law, so we can certainly take this conversation offline. I've checked with federal legal advocates as well as state legal advocates around disability, and there's nothing that says that a separate day school has to be in a physically separated location or have a different name, but it's about the programming that's offered to students.
So again, I think we need to have this conversation with academics, but I think our feeling has been that this is a better way to ensure that the needs of these students are met. These students have very specific needs, and having one principal in a large school that's trying to manage both those things going on is a challenge. So I think we're open to continue to have the conversation, but there are real reasons why we tried to do this to front load these programs into the schools that, because these schools are schools that often there are specific things that make sense in order to meet the needs of these students. So incorporating them in the 21st Century Buildings program gives us an opportunity to meet those students' needs, and then provides these avenues for co-location. So I think, like I said, we should have academics here, and I apologize, I should have thought of having them here knowing that this one was coming up. I just didn't think of it, but we'll make sure at the board meeting that we have them here.
And I'm not asking for them to not have a separate program. I'm asking for them the same name, and especially around the kids with emotional concerns, because they do look very different than students at Claremont or students at Lois T. Murray.
Well, when
We have just about 8 minutes left, so I'd like to,
Yeah.
as it was offered or suggested, to continue this conversation offline, and
Yes.
then we'll go to the procurement items. So thank you very much for the
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First one's kind of exciting.
Yes, it is. Would you like me to provide a brief overview? Or
Particularly on the first one, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Website
Yes.
design, yeah.
So the first contract is with Digicon to provide an online resource, to actually provide us with a new website to provide online resources and information for students and staff. The contract is for 3 years. It's a fixed price agreement, the total cost of which is $279,011.41. Do you have any questions?
Nelson, did you want to speak at all about the opportunities that come with a new website and what the expectations are? Or? Okay. And we just have a few minutes, but thanks, Ann.
I'm Ann Fullerton, the Communications Director.
And I'm Arzu Romani, a Communications Specialist who helped chair the committee for the selection of the company.
So as I think probably everyone knows, we've had the same website for many years. It is certainly looking tired and out of date. It is also very cumbersome because, as is typical with websites, it starts off fairly well organized and then people just keep adding and adding and adding and adding, and it grows into a giant sort of hydra. And the other issue with the current site is that it is not accessible to people with disabilities, which it very much should be, and which we are now required to ensure that it is as a result of request from the Office of Civil Rights. So we moved forward with selecting a new website vendor. The vendor will be subcontracting the important structure and design work to a Baltimore-based firm that has worked with other public agencies as well as various other organizations, nonprofits across the city, knows the city well, knows our audience well. The public-facing site will be completely redesigned. We're throwing out the baby and the bathwater and starting again from ground zero. We are also throwing out the staff website, City Schools Inside, and replacing that. Both of those projects will be conducted with a lot of community input. We'll be doing focus groups and surveys and various other engagement with the public to make sure that the new site actually represents what people want and can use well. We will also be forming work groups here and working with schools to ensure that we're taking into account principals' needs, teachers' needs, and across the whole city schools community. The site will feature individual school profile pages for schools and will include some of you may remember the old school choice site that became very difficult for us to maintain, but had some wonderful features that allowed people to search and browse for schools according to different criteria. For example, you could find a school that offered middle to high school and had a marching band and had AP courses and do a compare and contrast, partly to help with middle and high school choice selections, but also just to give a better picture of the schools that are offered across the grade bands. At the same time, we will be discontinuing offering a platform to schools for hosting of their individual websites. We're doing that largely because of, well, for two reasons. The website accessibility requirements for people with disabilities does extend to the schools, so allowing schools to maintain and organize their own websites becomes problematic because we have to monitor that and document that those sites are accessible. And actually, most of our schools are not using their websites now. The vast majority are completely outdated, some as far outdated as having not been edited at all since the 2015-16 school year. We also have a lot of schools who have already left our platform. But what we will be doing instead is supporting them should they want to have their own websites to make sure that they are accessible, and also supporting them if they choose instead to have a Facebook page or other social media presence. And we will be working with the schools to build out these school profiles to represent the schools fully and the way the schools want to be presented.
And just to clarify, that's charters and traditionals?
Yes.
Thank you.
I don't think you'll ever hear me say this before or again, but it seems like a very competitive price. It seems like the process produced a really good outcome. I'm curious if it is priced so that you're getting everything you want, or if we're limiting ourselves with the price that we received.
We can spend more? Is that what you're...
Well, I mean, you're doing it, you're going down to the school level, this is tied into the blueprint, it's tied
Right.
into
Right.
the enrollment work, all the good work that's coming out of the district. I want to feel confident that all of that can be
Yeah.
wrapped into this brand-new website that will be rolled out and people are able to use as you envision.
Our zoo sat in on all of the vendors and reviewed the proposal, so I'll defer to her on that one.
So our proposal was our request for bid was very, very specific, and they have said that they can meet every single one of our requirements. We're confident that they can. Do you want to take the price issue or should
Part of the process is checking references and others have used it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, and we spoke to references, we have looked at the different types of websites that they have built in the past, and we're confident that they can give us what we're looking for. They came in for a presentation as well, and we were incredibly impressed by their professionalism, by how well the subcontractors worked with each other, and are truly confident that they can give us what we are looking for.
My question is about, Anne, you mentioned that the existing website kind of became unwieldy, and you said that you would have pages for the different schools,
Right.
but that you wouldn't be hosting their websites.
Correct.
But then you went on to say, if they do want to invest in the website, that you would support them. I just want to know what that support looks like.
We will work with them to ensure that they meet the accessibility requirements, and we will be contracting with a monitoring service that crawls web pages to make sure that that compliance is adhered to. But in addition to that, as we support schools with other communications requirements and communications activities they want to take out, we're always available to consult with principals and other members of school staff about best practices in communications. We can provide guidance to them about how to structure their website, the sort of interactivity they should be looking at, and those sorts of things as well.
But they will need to be able to maintain it on their own.
Yes.
Okay. And I would go as far as saying if because there's nothing worse than a dated website with old information, right? So you
Right.
may as well not have one.
Right.
So if you don't see on your end that they have put in place structures to be able to maintain and manage their own websites, is there a way, or I don't know, do you guys have the authority to say, well, you need to take this down?
Right. We don't currently, with schools and school leaders having the autonomy that they do. We defer to them. We do flag for them when things are outdated.
Okay.
But it ends up being their responsibility to take things down. However, because we also have the responsibility at the district level to monitor the accessibility requirements, we will have logins to all of the school websites moving forward, which we don't now, which would allow us at minimum to fix things that are seriously troublesome if they're out of date. Or if there's some, for example, as it stands right now, under COMAR, and under board policy, we must post to a school website if there has been a decision or a recommendation to close or relocate the school. When the site is not on our platform, we are not able to do that directly, and understandably, some schools are reluctant to do it themselves. But moving forward, we'll have that login so we can take those steps. But we can also help the schools more directly fixing errors and problems when we have that access.
Can I also just add that what we've noticed is that the schools who are not updating their websites are typically the schools that are on our platform, right? So we're giving them the website and they're just not dealing with it. Most of
Gotcha.
the schools who have made the investment in developing a website and hosting it tend to keep it updated because they're making that investment and have made that commitment.
Okay. Thank you.
So I just want to say, I look forward to being able to support you in this work in the social media policy, because some of these things will fit very nicely in there.
And I'm going to pretend like I know something about marketing, and as you think about this, I imagine you're trying to balance the ability for schools to develop their own websites, but not deviate too far from the new brand that's being created at Central. In terms of, I work at Hopkins, and there's been an effort to create a certain image, a certain look, a certain brand, a certain logo throughout the entire decentralized institution of Hopkins, and I imagine that's something you're going to think about,
Yeah.
so that parents see some uniformity across those school
Yes.
those school websites.
Yes, and there will certainly be some content that would be required as
Right.
well, so that there's some uniformity as well.
So, are there any questions among board members on the next item, which is a little less exciting, which is on-call construction management, extending service? No
Super
disrespect to Blaine and others. Any questions?
My only question was that under the listed where it's vendors and amounts, I'm guessing it's an open-ended, as-needed, these are the approved vendors?
Correct. So it's a pre-qualified list of vendors to provide these services. The individual project is limited to $200,000. And what facilities would do would be solicit proposals for a specific project against, they would select 3 of these vendors to select from, and then they would award the contract based on the responses to those bids.
And my only question was, this is a renewal. Has this list grown, shrunk? Is it the exact same as, I tried to look back to 3 years ago?
It's the exact same list as the board approved 3 years ago.
How do you get on this list?
So what we do is we issue a solicitation. So a year from now, we'll be putting out a solicitation for these types of services again.
Okay.
A number of vendors respond. So last time we did this, 25 firms responded, and then we put together an evaluation team, much like what we did for the website. But this would be mostly comprised of individuals from facilities, and they would evaluate the responses. They'd look at the references, the credit worthiness of the firms, past project experience that we've had with them, and their compliance with MBE documents and other things in the solicitation. And then we would prioritize the list from, in this case, 1 to 25. We drew the line at 11.
It seems to me, I'm familiar with some of these vendors, but not all, but they seem like they're all really big players. And I get nervous that we're cutting off opportunities for minority and smaller businesses to be able to do work with our schools and with within our organization. So, okay. So maybe I just need to become more familiar with the list, but I would hope that in our selection process,
Sure.
that we are allowing smaller players to be able to benefit.
Correct. And I would point out on the following page are the MBE percentages for these contracts. So they range, the minimum requirements for MBE, WBE, Asian American participation is 29%. And you can see that some of the responses from these vendors range from a minimum of 29% all the way up to 63%. So this is the percentage of contracts that these prime contractors are prepared to allocate to those firms. Correct. Yes. In other words, we establish a minimum that's driven by state or city regulations, and then the vendors propose what they can do in accordance with that.